Hi, I'm Pranamya and you're watching Pages of the Globe. Alright, so if you're new to my channel, I'm Pranamya, and every day on my channel I read stories, I give analyses about them, I tell you a little bit about the author, and yeah, we have a lot of fun with my 100 subscribers. Now, before you scroll away and you're like, oh, I don't want to see, a short story being read and analyzed by a 10-year-old, A, I can promise you I am not a 10-year-old, and B, if you have questions, you can always check out my intro video that is pinned to the top of my channel, or at least it should be. And if you don't want to watch it, the quick rundown of it is basically, I promise you I'm not 10 years old, and I actually can read and give you analyses about short stories. I tend to give some very deep, thought-provoking questions, at least I like to think so myself, and I will almost always provide some historical context of each story. Without further ado, let's get on with the introduction. Alright, so the story that we are going to be reading today is The Haunted Mind by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the author. Hawthorne was born in 1804 and he died in 1864. He was a very influential American novelist and short story writer, known for his dark romanticism and themes on sin, guilt, morality, and things like that. Now, some key facts about him. He was born in Salem, Massachusetts, and he was a descendant of Puritan settlers. Now, as for his education, he attended Bowdoin College in Maine, where he became friends with future President Franklin Pierce and poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who you've probably heard of. Now, as for his major works, you probably have read The Scarlet Letter, published in 1850. It's a novel, which is probably his most famous works. It explores themes of sin, guilt, and redemption in Puritan New England and established his reputation as a major American writer. We still read The Scarlet Letter to this day in American schools, and I'm sure globally as well. Some other major works that you may have read include The House of Seven Gables, published in 1851, The Blithedale Romance, published in 1852, and The Marble Fawn, published in 1860. Now, as for his themes and styles, you will often notice that his works delve into sort of the complexities of human nature, moral dilemmas, and the impact of past on the present. He is widely known for his use of allegory and symbolism. Now, he was friends with President Franklin Pierce, and he wrote his campaign biography as well. Pierce then appointed him as the American Consul in Liverpool, a position Hawthorne held since 1853 to 1857. Now, as for his legacy, he's considered one of the great American writers. His exploration of moral complexity and his distinctive narrative style has influenced generations of writers and continue to be studied and admired. Now, as for The Haunted Mind, I don't want to spoil much, so I'm just going to tell you a couple basic facts about it. It was published originally in 1835, in the 1835 edition of the New England magazine, and it reflects Hawthorne's fascination with the human psyche, dreams, and the boundary between conscious and subconscious mind. Now, this style is written in a very rich, descriptive language and vivid imagery. You will see his use of allegory and symbolism is very prominent, and it creates this atmosphere that is sort of eerie and contemplative. So I would totally recommend this story if you are into those kind of strange, creepy stories that have a lot of depth to them, and you really, really have to read in between the lines to understand what's going on. Because I will say, I for one had to read this story 10 times to just sort of grasp at what was going on. And so, yeah, you might have to hear this multiple times, but it is a very interesting read, and I think you guys will totally love it. Without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. The Haunted Mind by Nathaniel Hawthorne. What a singular moment is the first one when you have hardly begun to recollect yourself after starting from midnight slumber. By unclosing your eyes so suddenly, you seem to have surprised the personages of your dream in full convocation round your bed, and catch one broad glance at them before they can flit into obscurity. Or, to vary the metaphor, you find yourself for a single instant wide awake in that realm of illusions, where their sleep has been the passport, and behold, its ghostly inhabitants and wondrous scenery, with a perception of their strangeness, such as you never attain while the dream is undisturbed. The distant sound of a church clock is borne faintly on the wind. You question yourself, half seriously, whether it has stolen to your walking ear from some gray tower that stood within the precincts of your dream. While yet in suspense, another clock flings its heavy clang over the slumbering town, with so full and distinct a sound, and such a long murmur in the neighboring air, that you are certain it must proceed from the steeple at the nearest corner. You count the strokes, 1, 2, and there they cease, with a booming sound, like the gathering of a third stroke within the bell. If you could choose an hour of wakefulness out of the night, it would be this. Since your sober bedtime at 11, you have had rest enough to take off the pressure of yesterday's fatigue, while before you, till the sun comes from far Cathay to brighten your window, there is almost the space of a summer night, 1 hour to be spent in thought, with the mind's eye half shut, and 2 in pleasant dreams, and 2 in that strangest enjoyments, the forgetfulness alike of joy and woe. The moment of rising belongs to another period of time, and appears so distant that the plunge out of a warm bed into the frosty air cannot yet be anticipated with dismay. Yesterday has already vanished among the shadows of the past. Tomorrow has not yet emerged from the future. You have found an intermediate space, where the business of life does not intrude, where the passing moment lingers and becomes truly the present, a spot where Father Time, where he thinks nobody is watching him, sits down by the side to take the breath. Oh, that he would fall asleep and let mortals live on without growing older. Hitherto you have lain perfectly still, because the slightest motion would dissipate the fragments of your slumber. Now, being irrevocably awake, you peep through the half-drawn window curtains, and observe that the glass is ornamented with fanciful devices in frostwork, and that each pane presents something like a frozen dream. There will be time enough to trace out the analogy while waiting the summons to breakfast. Seen through the clear portion of the glass, where the silvery mountain peaks of frost scenery do not ascend, the most conspicuous object is the steeple, the white spire of which directs you to the wintry lust of the firmament. You may almost distinguish the figures on the clock that has just told the hour. Such a frosty sky, and the snow-covered roofs, and the long vista of the frozen street, all white, and even the distant water hardened into rock might make you shiver, even under 4 blankets and a woolen comforter. Yet look at that one glorious star. Its beams are distinguishable from all the rest, and actually cast the shadow of the casement on the bed with a radiance of deeper hue than moonlight, though not so accurate an outline. You sink down and muffle your head into the clothes, shivering all the while, but less from bodily chill than the bare idea of a polar atmosphere. It is too cold even for the thoughts to venture abroad. You speculate on the luxury of wearing out a whole existence in bed, like an oyster in its shell, content with the sluggish ecstasy of inaction, and drowsily conscious of nothing but delicious warmth, such as you now feel again. Ah, that idea has brought a hideous one in its train. You think how the dead are lying in their coal shrouds and narrow coffins through the drear winter of the grave, and cannot persuade your fancy that they neither shrink nor shiver when the snow is drifting over their little hillocks, and the bitter blast howls against the door of the tomb. That gloomy thought will collect a gloomy multitude and throw its complexion over your wakeful hour. In the depths of every heart there is a tomb and a dungeon. Though the lights, the music, and revelry above may cause us to forget their existence, and the buried ones are prisoners whom they hide. But sometimes, when oftenest at midnight, those dark receptacles are flung wide open. In an hour like this, when the mind has a passive sensibility but no active strength, when the imagination is a mirror, imparting vividness to all ideas without the power of selecting or controlling them, then pray that your griefs may slumber, and the brotherhood of remorse not break your chain. It's too late. A funeral train comes gliding by your bed, in which passion and feeling assume bodily shape, and things of the mind become dim spectres to the eye. There is your earliest sorrow, a pale young mourner, wearing a sister's likeness to the first love, sadly beautiful, with the hallowed sweetness in her melancholy features, and grace in the flow of her sable robe. Next appears a shade of ruined loveliness, with dust among her golden hair, and her bright garments all faded and defaced, stealing from your glance with drooping head, as fearful of reproach. She was your fondest hope, but a delusive one, so call her disappointment now. A sterner form succeeds, with a brow of wrinkles, a look and gesture of iron authority. There's no name for him, unless it be fatality, an emblem of the evil influence that rules your fortunes. A demon to whom you subjected yourself by some error at the outset of life, and were bound his slave forever by once obeying him. See, those fiendish lineaments graven on the darkness, the writhed lip of scorn, the mockery of that living eye, the pointed finger, touching the sore place in your heart. Do you remember any act of enormous folly at which you could blush, even in the remotest cavern of the earth? Then you recognize your shame. Pass, wretched band. Well, for the wakeful one, if riotously miserable, a fiercer tribe do not surround him. The devils of a guilty heart that holds its hell within itself. What if remorse should assume the features of an injured friend? What if the fiend should come in woman's garments with a pale beauty amid sin and desolation and lie down by your side? What if he should stand at your bed's foot in the likeness of a corpse, with a bloody stain upon the shroud? Sufficient without such guilt is this nightmare of the soul, this heavy, heavy sinking of the spirits, this wintry gloom about the heart, this indistinct horror of the mind, blending itself with the darkness of the chamber. By a desperate effort you start upright, breaking from a sort of conscious sleep and gazing wildly round the bed, as if the fiends were anywhere but in your haunted mind. At the same moment, the slumbering embers on the earth send forth a gleam which palely illuminates the whole outer room, and flickers through the door of the bedchamber, but cannot quite dispel its obscurity. Your eye searches for whatever may remind you of the living world. With eager minuteness, you take note of the table near the fireplace, the book with the ivory knife between its leaves, the unfolded letter, the hat and the fallen glove. Soon the flame vanishes, and with it the whole scene is gone, though its image remains, an instant in your mind's eye when darkness has swallowed the reality. Throughout the chamber, there is the same obscurity as before, but not the same gloom within your breast. As your head falls back upon the pillow, you think, in a whisper be it spoken, how pleasant in these night solitudes would be the rise and fall of a softer breathing than your own, the slight pressure of a tenderer bosom, the quiet throb of a purer heart imparting its peacefulness to your troubled one, as if the fond sleeper were involving you in her dream. Her influence is over you, though she has no existence in the monetary image. You sink down in a flowery spot on the borders of sleep and wakefulness, while your thoughts rise before you in pictures, all disconnected, yet all assimilated by a pervading gladsomeness and beauty. The wheeling of gorgeous squadrons that glitter in the sun is succeeded by the merriment of children round the door of a schoolhouse, beneath the glimmering shadow of an old trees, at the corner of a rustic lane. You stand in your sunny rain of a summer shower, and wander among the sunny trees of an autumnal wood, and look upward at the brightest of all rainbows, overarching the unbroken sheet of snow, on the American side of Niagara. Your mind struggles pleasantly between the dancing radiance around the earth of a young man and his recent bride and the twittering flight of birds in spring about their new-made nest. You feel the merry bounding of a ship before the breeze and watch the tuneful feet of the rosy girls as they twine their last and merriest dance in a splendid ballroom, and find yourself in the brilliant circle of a crowded theater as the curtain falls over a light and airy scene. With an involuntary start, you seize hold on consciousness and prove yourself but half awake, by running a doubtful parallel between life and the hour which now elapsed. In both, you emerge from mystery, pass through a vicissitude that you can but imperfectly control, and are borne onward to another mystery. Now comes the peal of a distant clock, with fainter and fainter strokes, as you plunge further into the wilderness of sleep. It is the hell of temporary death. Your spirit has departed, and it strays like a free citizen among the people of a shadowy world, beholding strange sights, yet without power or dismay. So calm, perhaps, will be the final charge, so undisturbed as if, among familiar things, the entrance of the soul to its eternal home. The end. All right, so that was The Haunted Mind by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now this story, even though it's so short, it's so loaded, and it can kind of be hard to understand it at first, because at first it just feels so confusing, and even though there is a sequence of events happening, it can be hard to understand what Nathaniel Hawthorne was trying to get at. I mean, there's some parts where you're like, okay, I'm following along, like I get it, and then you come to certain paragraphs and you're like, wait, what? What's going on? So what is happening in this story exactly? Well, we see that in the story, Hawthorne kind of contemplates this relationship between our nocturnal conscience and our waking self with this uncommon poetry of understanding. I mean, in this world, there are certain issues that most people would rather just avoid confronting. And at the top of that list is one particular event that inevitably affects everyone, death. However, there were a few authors during that time, or not necessarily authors, but few, that accepted death and even embraced it. So Nathaniel Hawthorne was an author who explored this topic extensively through a myriad of short stories that he wrote in his lifetime. Now, in The Haunted Mind, exactly what happens? Well, he personifies feelings like sorrow, disappointment, fatality, shame, and remorse. And this funeral train contains only negative sensations, including death itself. According to Hawthorne, such a dark procession can be found in every person's mind, plaguing the subconscious. This symbolic funeral train has revealed that death is necessary and impossible to forget completely. This dark symbol is constantly repeated throughout many of the stories that you will see Nathaniel Hawthorne write. For example, in The Minister's Black Veil, the main character, he's telling his wife that I'm bound to wear this veil, both in light and darkness, in solitude before the gaze of multitudes. And it's just the dismal shade is separating me from the world. We often see this example of personification in many of his stories, like The Welding Knell as well. So what makes the story kind of more of a dark romantic? Well, the story tends to be a little different than many of the dark romantics that we read, as it seems to talk a lot about pleasure and happiness for much of the story. But in all of the themes is one that has an unsettling nature to it, as it talks about being awake in the night, in between sleep and awake, in the mind's eye half open. The theme of the story alone has a very dark romantic nature to it, and as it progresses, it gets further from the pleasurable things about being awake in the middle of the night to the darker and nightmarish aspects of it. Now, what kind of symbolism is shown? Well, we see that this glass is ornamented with fanciful devices and frostwork, and that each pane presents something like a frozen dream. The wheeling of the gorgeous squadrons that glitter in the sun is succeeded by the merriment of children round the door of a schoolhouse beneath the glimmering shadow of the old trees at the corner of a rustic lane. We see all of these things that sometimes almost feel shallow in themselves, and something that would almost look like it holds some sort of significance, but as you come closer to it, you see the true meaning, the true value, the true depth is not much. Now, just to conclude this thing, how do I specifically see this? How does this relate in modern context? Well, I see it as the haunted mind kind of starts out in this place of pleasure, and with that pleasure comes comfort. But as the story unfolds, we see that comfort can lead to something much, much darker. And I think that is such a poignant reminder of how these parts of life that we talk about, often so casually, the way when we talk casually about them, I do think that it brings a type of comfort to us. For example, when talking about death, it's so much easier to talk about it in a very opening and open-minded way, right? But when you really get down to it, you realize that the pure, honest truth of death is something that scares everyone, and it is almost impossible to overlook at times. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne is known for these kinds of gloomy stories that have a much deeper and darker meaning than you could ever fathom or imagine. So I would love to know y'all's analysis and what y'all thought about this story. That's it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.